Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Today, many of us are also standing in our own battlefields. Not with weapons, but with stress, confusion, fear, relationships, and purpose in life. The Gita is not a book of religion alone. It is a manual for life. It teaches us how to make decisions when we are confused, how to stay calm in difficult situations, how to perform our duties without fear, and most importantly, how to understand who we truly are. Let's start from what is science of the soul.
All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to transport ourselves straight into the heart of an ancient battlefield. Today, we're unpacking two specific, incredibly vivid verses from a deeply foundational text, the Bhagavad Gita, specifically texts 1.13 and 1.14. We are going to uncover how the rich sensory details buried right there in the source material, really just a few lines of text, actually managed to foreshadow the entire outcome of a massive epic conflict before a single weapon is even swung.
Now, I have a question for you. How do you know a war is lost before it even begins? It sounds like a total paradox, right? Just imagine standing on the front lines of an impending battle. The tension is incredibly thick. You're looking across this vast field at an opposing army just waiting for the very first strike. But according to the texts we're looking at today, the clues to who will ultimately win and who will lose aren't found in the size of the armies, and they aren't in the sharpness of their swords. The hidden spoilers to this epic conflict are actually buried entirely within the noise of the battlefield. Seriously, it's all in the sound. Let's look at exactly how the text builds this incredible scene. Section 1. The tumultuous sounds of war. Looking at verse 1.13, the text sets up the initial terrifying roar from the opposing army. And this brilliantly illustrates what that opposing side throws at our protagonists first. It's just a pure, overwhelming wall of noise. Just listen to this list of instruments detailed right there in the text synonyms. We've got conch shells, large drums, small drums, kettle drums, bugles, and horns. The text explicitly lists these out to give us a real sense of scale. Picture the incredible, chest-rattling vibration of all of these massive, ancient brass and percussion instruments being readied. We're talking about a completely deafening wall of sound, and that's without a single amplifier in sight. Now, what's really fascinating here is the specific Sanskrit phrasing used to describe exactly how these instruments were played. The text says, sahasa eva abhihanyanta, meaning they were all of a sudden simultaneously sounded. So it wasn't a slow build-up. It was literally an ambush of sound. And the result? Sa shabdas tumulo abhavat. The combined sound became tumultuous. The commentary actually makes it clear that the opposing side, led by a commander named Bhishmadev, who blew his own conch shell, is trying to project absolute dominance through sheer chaotic volume. It's straight-up psychological warfare meant to induce fear. But how does the other side respond to this massive sonic assault? That brings us to Section 2. The transcendental counterstrike. Shifting our focus over to verse 1.14, the source material builds this incredible contrast in the response from Lord Krishna and the warrior Arjuna. On one side, you have the mundane, that tumultuous, chaotic, totally terrifying combined sound from the opposing side's drums and horns we just talked about. But on the other side of the battlefield, Lord Krishna and Arjuna don't respond with a massive drumline of their own. Instead, they sound their conch shells. And the text uses a very, very specific word to describe these shells, divyau, which translates to transcendental or divine. The purport, the deep commentary on this verse, emphasizes this contrast super heavily. See, this isn't just a louder noise fighting a loud noise. This is a clear, piercing, divine sound cutting straight through the earthly chaos of the opposing army. Section 3. Decoding the divine chariot. But, before they even blow these conch shells, the text draws our attention to exactly where Krishna and Arjuna are stationed. Breaking down the tactical and symbolic advantages here, we start with the horses. The text specifies they are white, shwetai haye, and yoked to a great chariot. Then we have those divine conch shells we mentioned, which the purport explicitly states indicated there was no hope of victory for the other side. But the absolute most fascinating detail is the chariot itself. The commentary points out that this great chariot was actually donated to Arjuna by Agni, the fire god. And the hidden significance here, this chariot was capable of conquering all sides wherever it was drawn over the three worlds. So structurally, the text is placing Arjuna on a literally invincible foundation before the battle even kicks off.
And that brings us to a really brilliant clue hidden right in plain sight within the vocabulary of verse 1.14. The text refers to Krishna here using a very specific name, Madhava. The synonym breakdown translates Madhava literally as the husband of the goddess of fortune. This is such an incredible Easter egg. The author didn't just use this name randomly to make the poetry fit, no way. It is placed there deliberately to foreshadow the ultimate outcome. But you might be wondering, why does the goddess of fortune matter on a gritty battlefield? Let's unpack that logic.
Section 4. The formula for victory.
The crucial point is laid out by the author of the purport in a flawless logical progression. Let's walk through it together. Step 1. Lord Krishna is present on the side of the Pandavas, that's Arjuna's side. Step 2, the text establishes that the goddess of fortune never ever lives alone without her husband, Krishna. So where he is, she absolutely must be. Step 3, therefore, because Krishna is there, fortune is there. The conclusion is undeniable. Victory and fortune are already awaiting Arjuna. The enemy's fate is completely sealed, all derived from the simple fact of Krishna's presence on this fire god-donated chariot.
The commentary anchors this whole concept with a really powerful quote. Jayastu Panduputranam Yesham Pakshajanarana, which means victory is always with persons like the sons of Pandu because Lord Krishna is associated with them. The text views this alignment not just as some tactical battlefield advantage, but as an absolute, uncompromising guarantee. I mean, the opposing army can make as much tumultuous noise as they want with their kettle drums and bugles, but they are fighting against an ontological certainty.
And this elegantly brings us to the core takeaway of our explainer today. The transcendental sound was a revelation, not just a retaliation. Impartially looking at the text, we can see how the author uses a very simple visual and auditory description, literally just two men blowing conch shells on a chariot, to reveal a much deeper truth. The sound produced by the conch shell of Lord Krishna wasn't just there to match the enemy's volume. It was the sound of inevitable victory. The battle's outcome was effectively decided, published, and broadcasted across the entire battlefield before a single sword was drawn.
It's a really fascinating way to look at conflict, isn't it? That true power isn't necessarily the loudest or the most chaotic, but rather what you are fundamentally aligned with. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to ponder. If ultimate victory follows the presence of fortune, as this ancient text suggests, how might you align yourself with the forces of fortune in your own life? What is your invincible chariot? I really hope this explainer gave you a totally new perspective on how to read these incredible texts, finding the epic narratives hidden right there in the sound, the synonyms, and the symbols. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.